Yeah, sorry, Stewart Knox, Workforce Investment Board, NORTEC, 11 counties.
And can you tell us, Stuart, what kinds of challenges, in your estimation, do workforce leaders face today?
Leaders today really face the challenge between working with local communities and primarily in terms of the job creation side. So what are we doing in terms of job creation and in terms of getting people placed in the right careers?
And how's this changed? How have the challenges that you face changed, or how has leadership itself changed in the workforce arena since you started?
Well, I think for the most part, we used to all run very similar programs in terms of the three allocated funding sources. That's really changed in the last 5 years, primarily in this last year with this economy. Primarily, we have changed to actually have to work with the local communities in a much more in-depth manner and really work with our employer groups to figure out what the next workforce needs are. And so, especially in my area, in the rural communities, we have to work with the communities to figure out what their needs are, really around capacity building. A lot of our funding in the rural areas is really based on federal and state resources, and as our state suffers from long-term deficit problems, as the nation does, we're finding much more layoffs in the public sector. So we really have looked at capacity building for local communities. And so in my area, I've got 22 rural cities and 11 rural counties, and all of which need capacity building around that scenario.
So what's the work that you do on a day-to-day basis? What does it look like?
It's managing, first of all, obviously the funds and managing the resources that are coming into our communities. The second step that we do, we've set up resource teams, and again in a large area, we have basically two teams, one in Chico, one in Reading, that look at what are the resources coming into the communities and how do we best manage and facilitate that those resources are hitting the ground in the necessary method, and really looking at how that can affect job creation for those communities. So, for example, under ARA, the two teams really looked at, first of all, what are the resources that have potential to come into the communities, and what is the potential to deploy those resources locally to actually create jobs. Then, in turn, looking at how does it affect the employers, potentially. And so we really focus on healthcare and energy. I think we have a lot of opportunity with solar energy primarily, but renewable as a whole. And healthcare still, obviously, with the changes in the healthcare law, have a lot of opportunity as well. So we do a lot of work within the local communities, each of the cities, each of the counties, through our one-stop centers.
How many cities and counties?
22 cities, rural cities, and 11 counties. So a lot of work is done one-on-one and with groups within each of those communities around what they're doing and what access they may need to potential funding sources. We then act as a broker for those funding sources as a regional capacity building entity. And we're also working with our economic development corporations, which have suffered greatly in the last year and a half, because their funding primarily has come from cities and counties that no longer have that funding source. And so we've really tried to figure out what they can do best as well. They've always done attraction activities primarily, and now they're trying to switch that up a little bit more to business retention and expansion. So we're assisting with that.
Okay. What is something that you're doing right now you're pretty proud of?
I think in terms of most of what we've been doing in the last year and a half is, again, really working on sector strategies, and those sector strategies, again, include mostly the renewable energy and healthcare. There's other sectors, obviously. Agriculture is big for us, and trying to figure out how that fits into job creation as well, but primarily around renewable energy. Mm-hmm. We've received 4 major grants in the last year and a half, and primarily around energy, renewable energy. We have 2 large solar companies that have come into the area and are doing solar testing fields for new technology, and we've linked that with the CSUC Chico, California State University Chico, and really looking at how do you take that to commercialization. So we have students working with the industry and taking it to commercialization. So that's primary. We figured out about 3 years ago through the Wired grant that commercialization and taking R&D is primary to a local economy driver.
All right. This morning, Francesca Roy concluded her remarks by saying something like, one of the dangers of working with employers and sectors is that it's very easy to focus on the short-term transactional activities and much more difficult to engage on the long-term kind of strategic priorities that the community has. Can you talk a little bit about what some of that work looks like or what that challenge looks like for you?
Sure. And absolutely, she's right on. The issue for that would be, in short term, a lot of communities think in terms of call centers, quick retail type stores, that kind of commercialization of your local economy. We've really focused on R&D as being a primary driver for an economy, and what we've looked at is like the areas such as the Silicon Valley. Tons of research and development deployed through local employers. So how do we connect our community colleges as well, but primarily Chico, into the commercialization of their product line that students may be working in, and vice versa, so that the employers are engaged in that conversation as well, which you'd like to think that's taking place, but it primarily doesn't. And that the employers start asking the questions for the university, and we facilitate those meetings around what are your students working on and what is the industry working on, and then really looking at what are the long-term effects on the economy for that, and what are the current needs of the workforce to further develop those products. And we're finding obviously that being from a rural community, there's a huge need and a gap in terms of R&D primarily, and in terms of commercializing the product line. So we think, especially in small communities, that there's a lot of potential for that growth for that area.
Okay. And what role do you play, and what role do other workforce leaders play in advancing that agenda, and really the larger agenda of job creation?
Yeah. I think a lot of areas are probably have not focused, and for maybe good reasons, on the job creation component, mostly on the training side. There's always the issue of economic development has found themselves in this scenario of what have you done for me lately issue. And so that's going to be a key component as well, is we don't want to get caught up in what have you done for us lately. However, that said, I think in this economy we really have to work on the job creation component. Even though obviously we're a training entity, we need to work with our economic development leaders to do that.